Hello and welcome to ThoughtCast, the SPJIMR podcast, a conversation about business and leadership between a corporate head and an academic.
My name is Vineeta Dwivedi and I teach business communication at SPJIMR. Today, we have with us a leader, an excellent communicator who heads the India business of one of the world's leading healthcare companies, Sanofi. We have with us today Mr. Rajaram Narayanan, the Managing Director and Country Chair of Sanofi in India. With a distinguished career in HUL and Airtel, Mr. Narayanan now leads the strategic agenda for Sanofi in India. They are also at the forefront of the fight against COVID 19 with two vaccine candidates due to be out soon.
Thank you very much, Vineeta, for this opportunity. I must say I have interacted with students in your campus at SPJN. I worked with many people who are alumni of SPJN, and it's always been a pleasure, uh, especially because of the innovative nature of the curriculum as well as the kinds of challenges that you, uh, you know, come up with and when you engage externally with all of us. So I'm really delighted to be here today.
Wonderful. So now you're virtually visiting us again, and we are going to engage you in a conversation. And, the idea of this podcast is that we learn from your own leadership lessons and about the things that you have done in your career and what are the challenges currently. So let me start with the most pressing question of our times, the availability and efficacy of vaccines in the fight against COVID 19. Sanofi has been making vaccines for a long time and been present in India for 60 years with, with a wide range of portfolio of medicines and therapies. But vaccine availability is the forefront of our mind right now. What is your take on how the vaccine scenario will be uh, in India, in our country, and in the world in the near future?
Yeah, thank you, Vineeta, for that question. It's a very, very open question at this point of time because there is a lot which is not known about the vaccines. But at the same time, I must say that it has been by far the most remarkable effort to develop a solution or some kind of a remedy to this, crazy pandemic which has been there. I don't think there has been an effort of this magnitude where in less than 12 months we've had over, I think close to 200 different organizations, several governments working together to advance the development of a vaccine. So to that extent, I think we have to be extremely proud about how, the society and the industry as well as the governments have come together. Phenomenal amount of science which has gone behind it. Now, the question is, what is really the challenge of getting everybody vaccinated? And there are two of them. First is get as many people vaccinated. That is challenge number one. And the second is, will that result in some normalcy in life? And these are to some extent interrelated, but not really. I believe that in the short term, there will be a sufficient amount of vaccine. All across the world, we've already now about 6 odd vaccines which have come into the market. There are many more under development. Production capacities are getting increased. We ourselves as a company are in fact producing 3 of the top vaccines, which are not ours. So I think there will be sufficient amount of vaccines in about 9 months. However, what we have to be careful about is that there will be outbreaks here and there, and we cannot assume that there will not be any more outbreaks of COVID because there will be the complexity of variants. So full normalcy may still take some time. I believe that we will have enough in India for sure in the next maybe 6 months or maybe 9 months. But we cannot afford to let our guard down, and we need to be taking all the necessary precautions because normalcy will not return, however, for some length of time in this world. Now, what's happening in the longer term? The good thing is lots more. Okay, so there are boosters, there are single dose vaccines, there are potential antiviral drugs. So I expect that in another 1 year or so, we will have even more revolutionary solutions. The access will be there for far more number of people, but the next 9 to 12 months will be more about availability, about getting people vaccinated, and not letting our guard down.
True, true. So, Rajaram, I mean, you just mentioned about Sanofi vaccines. One of them I read recently is in the third phase of trial. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so we have two real roles that we are playing. As I said earlier, one is that we are in fact manufacturing for some of the others like Pfizer, J&J, Moderna, so that enough vaccines are going to be available. At this stage, we have two of our own complementary vaccines. The first is an adjuvant recombinant vaccine, which we are developing with GSK in partnership. We are now in phase 3. We've had very encouraging phase 2 results. And if the outcome of the phase 3 is good and regulatory approvals are received, we should be in quarter 4 of this year. Okay, so that's a good sign and an encouraging sign. We also, in parallel, have an mRNA vaccine, which is going through a phase 1 and 2 right now. Preclinicals are very good, but that could take more time, more than a year to find itself in the market. So really, we have full on. I think more vaccines, the better. This is not a pandemic which is just going to disappear. It's certainly going to be there for some more time. And the race is against the virus. So I hope that, we will also contribute by adding more vaccines into the requirements of the world.
So, these are going to be manufactured in India and will be available.
But at this point of time, we haven't really firmed up on manufacturing. Obviously, availability, it is meant for the entire world, including India, when it becomes available. But manufacturing for us is a global footprint. Some of it is located in Europe, some of it in the US, some of it is in India. So that will be a decision taken later once we have the results.
So I wanted to, I mean, because you've been in the pharma industry, you've been following this pandemic more closely than anybody, and you understand the challenges even probably much deeper way. Do you think it has necessitated a rethink of the healthcare system or the infrastructure for it in India? And what would your suggestions be?
Vineeta, I actually got into this industry only about 7 years ago, and I have been in a consumer goods and a consumer services, experience before that. And it never struck me that, these issues, which were all around us as citizens, were so significant. When it's only now that these things have, become center stage for all of us. I think it was known that India's health infrastructure was broken, not adequate, but the pandemic has really taken away all the covers from it. And we have, as a country, built a system which has been far more dependent on the private sector rather than the public sector. Most of the world, the infrastructure is developed by the public sector or public spending by the government, and the private acts as an important support. We don't have that. So, what are some of our top issues? And I think it's very clear. I think everybody has seen the visuals. Everybody has seen the stories. We have a pathetic infrastructure in terms of hospital beds. I think it's about half per thousand compared to any other part of the world. Most of it is also located in the bigger cities. We don't have adequate doctors in terms of the ratios are poor. Whether you take doctors, whether you take nurses per thousand people, our insurance system is just picking up, and there is no sort of predictable supply as far as consumables, oxygen, etc. So all these things became very visible, right, to us. So, what are the general thoughts which people have? And I think I would add some of the observations in the recent time. The first, I think, is very clearly we must have government at the center of it. So it has to be public spending. I think trying to get private sector to participate is not ever going to meet the requirement. The second is really to look at our primary healthcare centers, because that's the other piece which needs to be boosted up. We don't have today nursing over there. Now, can everybody, participate in this? I think yes. I think there's a role for even private people to participate in public healthcare, in primary healthcare centers. But let's also look at what could be an alternative model for India. Telemedicine, mobile medicine. Now, these are things in a infrastructure which is there in India can come through as big relief, right? Because today with our 4G networks all over the place, broadband all over the place, we don't really have to look for physical infrastructure. We can look at for a hub and spoke kind of a model. Now over here, you have enough opportunity for private sector to take part. And the last piece of it is we need more doctors, both at the MBBS level as well as postgrads. Today, the fact is if you have a doctor who passes out of MBBS, they don't want to immediately start getting into general medicine practice. They need more postgrad seats. Otherwise, they would like to move away from the medical profession itself because it does not seem to be rewarding enough. And often it is not good enough to go and serve in rural areas or smaller cities. I think if I look at four things, government spending in districts in terms of physical hospital infrastructure, getting a hub and spoke, boosting up the telemedicine piece, and then the whole numerical availability of doctors and nurses. I think if we don't attack this core issue, I think all other stuff is fluff.
True. So we have to have more medical colleges and nursing colleges, and yeah.
Yeah, you need more balance. I mean, you have to put, you need human beings over there to do this. We've seen it. I mean, and we've seen what difference they can make when they are there at this time. So I think this is something that has to come. And I'm sure that, it is now visible.
Absolutely. I think those are all three of them are very, very important points. I wanted to now go back to and ask something about the brands that Sanofi has. When I was thinking of what I'm going to ask, I just immediately Combiflam comes to mind, or Allegra. Some of these medicines are very well known in India and are ubiquitous. Everybody, even children would know what they're used for, and they're very reliable. The brand recall is very high. How do you build these power brands?
It is an interesting question because very often we don't think about, brands in the pharmaceutical world. Actually, if you look at even worldwide, there are brands which are, $20 billion size. Some of them are bigger than the largest FMCG brands in pharmaceuticals. And I think brands get built very differently at times, but there are also several similarities with, and I'm sure, students in SPJ and all the institutes, we all grew up learning about very conventional, marketing with 4Ps, which became 5, 6Ps, etc. And then new models came up. So there are some similarities, but there are also some specifics. I think for Sanofi, the starting point is that we're a science-based company, right? So it is very important for us that whatever we do is rooted in science in terms of where we want to create the edge. Most important thing in building a brand in the pharma industry, and that's true for Allegra and Combiflam, is that you need to have a product that truly delivers. These are areas which can be very debilitating for people. Pain, allergy, they take away the joys in life. They come in the way of your day-to-day working. So unless there is real relief which is given, the brand cannot be trusted. So the most important thing is that they must provide the relief which they're intending to promise. There is no second chance to get that, unlike some of the other related industries. So therefore, you need to build the trust of physicians and patients. So what do you need to do? You need to be very responsible. You have to tell the full story. In a consumer goods brand, very often the classic FMCG or something like that, anything that you had to say was, which you didn't want the consumer very often to read, you would put an asterisk at the bottom. Now, here it can't be done like that. You have to go to the physician and say upfront, these are the side effects. It is not suitable for certain types of patients. These are the studies which back it. These are also competition which does as well. So there is surfacing of the absolute truth is very important in this, and then you compete.
But it must be very challenging also. I'm sorry, it just kind of begs this question that, what about duplicates? What about, fake news about something? Because trust is so important, you're saying.
Absolutely. And any opportunity you get to reinforce it with substantial evidence, we use that. So whether it is, our medical representatives, for example, they go and talk to people who are experts, which are the doctors, which is not necessarily true for many other categories. The other piece of it is innovation. Yeah. So Allegra, for example, it is an anti-allergy product, but it is non-drowsy. Yeah, and therefore it has a huge advantage, for example, for people who are driving, people who may be working in factories. And these are some innovations which are very important. Some times ago, we discovered that a lot of people make tablets without even knowing whether the size of tablet can be swallowed or not. Yeah, and I don't think there's enough thought which goes into something as simple as that. Allegra is a tablet which has a compact, reduced mass so that people can swallow it easily. You have innovations in both Allegra and Combiflam, which are for children because they need to have pediatric formulations with palatable taste, etc. The third piece of it, I would say, is access. Huh? Not many, Combiflam costs between one rupee and 1 rupee 20 paisa, and that's been the plus or minus kind of price for it for many years. How many products in India for the last 20 years would have operated at that price? So today, that access, that means, somebody who's done a hard day's labor, is having body pain, can pick up a product for 1 rupee or 1 rupee 25 paisa. Now that's very important in our kind of a, value-driven country. So I think if I were to, summarize, it is pretty much similar, but at the specificities are it's science-based as far as Sanofi is concerned, efficacy, no compromise, innovation which is very relevant to patients, and value which comes from pricing in terms of access. So those are some of the very key things to keep driving at, and you'll be very consistent with it.
Well, that's very interesting because really we don't look at medicine brands as these power brands things, and it was a very valuable answer. Thank you for that. Now I want to ask you something about this whole COVID year, and it's like all kinds of businesses have suffered, and we, like you mentioned earlier, that this is a disruption which no one had seen for generations. But they also say there is an opportunity in every adversity. So if I were to ask you, what would be the three biggest learnings from this? What would they be?
So I think there are lots of learnings. I think the learnings have developed over the last 15 months, and I must say it has been very devastating. And in the beginning, it was all about scenario planning for all of us. What can happen, what's the backup, etc. But if there's one learning which I have at the end of 15 months is you have to be absolutely clear on what are the most important priorities and what is it that is in your control. So for us, for example, we were very clear that there are many things to do, but three things are very important. Safety of our employees, whether physical or emotional. Supply. We are in the medicines business. We cannot allow any breakdown in availability of medicine. And the third was service, which is to service to our doctors, our trade, our patients, community, to make sure there is no drop in that. Now, when you make three choices, you have to give up on stuff. So maybe you will have a sales drop somewhere. Maybe you will have to drop a few projects. So these three, if they are the anchor, then you can do other things, during adversity. For me, the big learning number one was control what you can and focus on what you can control, but importantly, be clear that this is the core purpose of why you exist as an organization at this time. Yeah. And it needs to be very well done. You can't talk safety of employees and be superficial about it. I think the second big learning for me is that there is a lot of noise around, disruption, innovation. These are the times when, you can change opportunities, another word for adversity, all of that stuff, right? It is true, however, that it is okay to disrupt when things are not stable because it is more difficult to disrupt when things are stable. So I've found that we've been able to do a lot more new things during this time because you were not worried about being perfect. So you must learn to disrupt at these times because there can be a temptation that let things get stable and then we will make changes. So, what did we sort of learn? Three, four things. One, for example, the big opportunity came to us in terms of availability. There was disruption in terms of supplies, but e commerce came up from nowhere, right? So, we found that we could reach a far higher number of patients, get far more insights about purchase behavior during this time than we have ever got. So, that was one big thing which we get out of this. The second, processes inside your company, typically are designed for people to sit near each other, pass papers, send emails, etc. You couldn't meet each other for many days. So you did away with a lot of processes. You relied more on trust. You gave up on, wanting to double check and check, etc., and nothing went wrong. So we were able to cut down on several levels and layers of decision making and become far more agile. So there are many things you realize were just there and never questioned, but that's the second learning. The third, I think, for us is there's a substantially higher awareness of healthcare today. Many things have come in our vocabulary, comorbidity, vaccination, respiratory distress. All of this gives us an opportunity to engage with patients and help them manage their health better. And the last piece of it is that digitization has become very ubiquitous, right? I mean, everybody today is comfortable with technology at some level or the other. And that's the time for us now to make sure we don't let it slip. But if there's one overriding thing which I've noticed is the power of your people. Yeah. And that's the biggest learning. Through all this, when you have a good culture, when you have employees, who've been engaged, and it's something that's been sustained over a period of time, you will find your organization thriving.
So this is a good point in this conversation to pivot and talk about your own personal journey, your excellent career from HUL to Airtel and then to Sanofi. How has your management style evolved? What is the mantra for success as an individual?
Uh, I wish there was something, many of these things are not very deliberate. Maybe some things are deliberate when you pass out of college and you choose a company and then you make a couple of job changes. But most of the time, I think it's about what you learn. My own management style, I believe, would have been influenced by two, three things. One is the kinds of roles that I did over a period of time. The second would be, the perspective one builds depending on the kind of responsibility. And the third, and I think probably for me the most important influence has been the leaders I have worked for or worked with. They have perhaps, encouraged or discouraged, styles of management. But if I were to track over the last period, I would say the first phase would have been more for me was around delivery, do and deliver. There is a second phase, which I would say is more around when you start making strategic choices and you begin to build your judgment. And that's about, deciding on things where you could go wrong and there can be a cost of failure. And that's when you learn to listen more and, decide. But today, I would say it is far more about uh, how do you sustain growth? How do you sustain the growth of people, your business, and the environment you are around? I think what I've learned today, and maybe what's probably now coming in my management style, is it is more important now to inspire and engage every employee or everybody in your team to achieve their best because you don't have all the answers anymore. But there are some things which are critical, irrespective of how the style evolves. I think as a leader, bringing clarity. I believe more and more my role is to bring clarity. It is not to direct, be a compass. You're generally sort of keeping an eye uh, on the compass, saying, is the organization and people, are they in the broadly the right direction? Uh, are the morals in the right place, ethics in the right place? Is the mood of the organization? So you are keeping an eye on the compass. And the third part of it really is a lot of communication, Vineeta. The more you go senior, I think you have to learn to invest yourself. It can be tiring. It can be, you have to learn to like it and enjoy it and communicate, communicate, communicate.
I agree. And I think that is where I will ask you a supplementary question right away about communication. You, as a leader of a company, like you said, and as a compass within and for outsiders also, you have lots of stakeholders talking to you, asking you for information. What will you say to young managers to improve their communication?
Well, I think a lot of the current talent which is there is, I think they are pretty natural at that increasingly. And also the kind of communication has changed drastically from being, verbal and oral to being able to communicate well across different media. Yeah, so that itself, I mean, I don't think, what I was good at earlier is any more the most important thing now. I need to get better in many places. But let me sort of look at a couple of non-negotiables which I think there are. I think the first is you've got to read, and prepare. And there's no substitute for that. I think, however talented you might be, you cannot walk in cold. Yeah, and fluency is never a substitute for the conviction you bring. The second is I normally take a very hard look at who's the audience and what do you want them to feel at the end of this communication about your company and about you as a leader. Normally, I would, make a set of questions and answers, write them down, sometimes discuss it with the team in case, one wants to sort of have a second opinion on those kind of things. But in general, I would say the world is now where it's very important to be yourself and have conviction in the matters. And that comes always with the rigor of preparation. Some years ago, perhaps there was more a premium on what how the person's vocabulary is or what the kind of English is, and I don't think those things matter anymore. Certainly in the outcome. But if you're still keen on working at it, then I think it helps to record, listen, get feedback, those kinds of things. So always work on being prepared because if you're well prepared, then it shows.
Very nicely said. Yes, yes, makes sense. Totally. So I wanted to ask you now something about a story that you can tell us, or a quick incident that you remember from your career, always.
Oh, I'm sure there'll be many which I presume one can't always share without quoting names. But well, I think one was very early in my career, right in the beginning, and I think it still stands out for me because when I started my career with Hindustan Unilever, I started in exports for a short while, and I was looking after exports of processed foods to Russia and coffee. And one of the shipments I had made was, had developed a serious quality issue, and the buyer was threatening to not pay and send everything back. And I was called by my boss and said, you are going to Russia. And it was my first international trip ever. Okay. And this was, and I was like very excited about it. I didn't know what the agenda was. And I was told that I had to take a quality person with me and go over to outside Moscow, sort the problem, and come back. And not come back if I had not sorted it. So I went with the quality control manager lady, and so this is hardly the most exciting way to make your first international trip. And I went outside, and this was a place about 100 kilometers outside Moscow. There were maybe 15 containers of various processed foods from the company. And there were these big guy and assistant of his, and he came with a set of keys and said, "These are the keys for these containers. Please go and sort them out and tell me what is the degree of the complaint which is here." And he disappeared. And he was a buyer. So both of us, sat and we didn't know the language. We had to hire people, calculate money to pay. At that time, the ruble was 10,000 rubles to a dollar. So by the time that we could even calculate, it was tricky. And for 7 days, we sat there, counted cartons, bottles, cans, separated the good quality from the bad quality, and came back and filed our report after 7 days. Probably, I didn't realize that this is what they mean by hands-on training when you join a company. But I think there was a lot of value in it, that once you own a problem, you go and fix it. The good thing was that at the end of the day, it was a big loss for us. But my boss took the entire responsibility. I wasn't even mentioned in this entire episode, although he didn't even know about it before that. And I think it showed a lot of leadership character that, when there is a problem, you step up in the front and you support your team. And when there is credit to be given, you give it to your team.
Thank you so much for sharing. One final thing I wanted to check with you about is this when earlier on I was talking about the pharma industry, preparing to talk to you, I realized that the pharma industry never really went into a lockdown because you had a lot to do. The demand for medicines was phenomenal in the last 2 years. So how do you cope with the pressure of your job? How do you relax in a personal level? What's your way of relaxing, dealing with stress?
I think I'm moderate at dealing with stress. I do get stressed, but I find that the relief from stress lies both within your workplace as well as outside it. You know, and it's not necessary to seek the relief only outside of work. And some of the things one I do is I have learned, particularly in the last 15 months of the pandemic, is not to try and cope up with everything. There are some important things, like, as we said, supply service safety. This is the most important. So some things, rest of it will go wrong. And if you are just clear about what's the most important thing which should leave you sleepless, then you will be better off not losing sleep on other things. For example, uh, I would sleep well if I knew there was no case or there was no risk to any employees. If at that time, and everybody at the end of every day was fine, we had no sort of serious illness, or everybody was under control, and that was a good day for me. That de-stresses you. Otherwise, you can be worried about everything and feel responsible for it. The second, I think, is trust people around you. And I learned more and more in the last, during adversity, not just now, but whenever there has been a difficult time, that people will often do a better job uh, than you, even if they may approach it very, very different. And, as leaders, we often want to have a view on everything. We try and hold it back because either because of prior experience or because of, wanting to contribute, we tend to put our mind into everything. And I think we should resist that, because if you have a good bunch of people, even if they haven't done it before, mostly they will come with an equally good or a better solution. And that can de-stress you a lot. Outside of work, I spend time with family or a few close friends. I find that very much of a relief, whether it is, and I can't de-stress alone in private. For me, a very good friend I fall back to is really my wife, because, she's the one who, with whom I can talk, get a fresh perspective, be told where I'm going okay, where I am not. And I find that very useful. I find talking to a few trusted people very useful to de-stress. Apart from that, there are certain basics, I think, which are good for health in terms of just stepping out, walking, breathing exercises, things like that. But those are very personal. But I think there is, for me, one big lesson. Don't try and de-stress about your work outside of your work. First, try and release the stress within your work environment by delegating, by trusting, etc. That helps a lot more.
That is a very good point that you're making, and I think you've already made that before. That's your leadership style, also, that you like to delegate, you like to empower people, and that's what you're trying to say. That automatically takes care of some of the work stress because you're not taking all on yourself, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And, if I were to really look at my career journey, and maybe I can talk a bit about this. I've been, some choices are very deliberate, as I said, but a lot of experience and learning comes from, what you do with that opportunity. And I was very fortunate to work with three world-class companies, each of whom have been very different and have shaped me very, very differently.
Right. So I think this has been an amazing conversation, Rajaram. Thank you so much for all the uh, stories, all the insightful learnings that you have shared with us. I can't be more grateful to you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this podcast recording with us. You were listening to SPJIMR's ThoughtCast, produced by Vineeta Dwivedi, edited by Amulya, supported by Pani, Rishabh, and Kaushik. Thank you for listening.